I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them. Remember the ladies.
Cleveland, Ohio, the beginning of the 20th century. It was a city booming with prosperity, a growing immigrant population, a flourishing industrial economy, the promise of opportunity everywhere, including the southeast corner of St. Clair in Ontario, one of the homes of the Cleveland Law School. As the 1904 Law School Bulletin read,
"No distinction will be made in the admission of students on account of sex."
With this revolutionary concept, the Cleveland Law School would become the first law school in Ohio to dare admit women. Women who otherwise didn't have any rights. No right to vote, no right to own property, not even a right to custody of their own children. And now, women would be allowed to join the ranks of men to study law. Slowly but surely, they arrived. The first 100 ladies. They were independent, forward-thinking women. Women like Elizabeth Williams, class of 1908, believed to be the very first woman graduate. Gertrude Hendrick, class of 1911, and the first woman allowed into the Cleveland Bar Association. Harriet J. Willis, 1915. Eva Leah Jaffa, 1915. Belle Grieve, 1918. Rosalind Goldberg, 1920, the first woman assistant police prosecutor in the city of Cleveland. With each name, each face, went a story of desire and absolute conviction. Women like Mary Grossman, one of 9 children, the daughter of immigrants. After graduating from a local business college, Mary worked for 16 years at her cousin's law office.
Well, I think she was just doing office work there, secretary, but she liked the status of the men lawyers better than she liked her own situation there. So in spite of the fact that she was discouraged by these men, she pursued in spite of that.
At 30 years old, Mary Grossman enrolled in the Cleveland Law School, graduating in 1912, one of only 2 women in a class of 44 men. When she passed the Ohio bar that year, she was one of only 3 female attorneys in the entire state, and in 1918, one of the 2 women to be admitted as the first female members of the American Bar Association.
They were prejudiced against women, period. That's why we had to fight so hard in order to get the right to vote. It just followed through because it was a part of the American fabric, a part of our heritage. But that's what made us greater, because persons become great because of the obstacles that they overcome.
And Mary certainly overcame, fighting for the right to vote as chair of the League of Women's Suffrage in Cleveland. Finally, in 1920, women officially won the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. It was the tool by which women like Mary Grossman would gain all other rights. And in 1923, she put it to use, running for Cleveland Municipal Court judge and winning. She was the first woman in the entire country to win an elected seat on a municipal court bench. But the struggle for equality didn't end there.
When Judge Grossman was elected a judge, why the rest of the judges, they ignored her, gave her the worst, they made this room for her, didn't even have any windows in it. And because she was little in stature, I practiced before Judge Grossman, so I knew her very, very well. And she had to sit on the thick law books, 7 of them, because they gave her the biggest desk that there was and in the lowest chair, so that her chin only came up to the top of the desk. And so she had to sit on all of these books, done deliberately.
While she stood just 5 feet, Mary soon developed a very tall reputation as a strict, no-nonsense judge.
These male lawyers thought she was very tough. In fact, they called her Hard-Boiled Mary.
I wouldn't call her hard-boiled at all. She was just a student of the law, and she called the law, she interpreted the law as she felt that it should be.
At the age of 80, Mary Grossman stepped down from the municipal court bench after 33 years. She died in 1977 at age 98. Lillian Westrop was another Cleveland lady ahead of her time. She had finished business college and then enrolled in the Cleveland Law School, graduating in 1915 magna cum laude. As one of the few women lawyers, she went into private practice where she remained until 1931. It was this year that she was appointed as a municipal court judge in Cleveland. The Honorable Mary Grossman administered her oath of office. It was a position Lillian would retain until retirement in 1957.
Well, Judge Westrop also was, we all were very proud of her. We were proud of anybody who succeeded to become a judge when there were so few women practicing law. And I think that is very much to their credit that they achieved that when we were a minority to start with.
We knew Lillian very well. She was active among the women lawyers group, which was a small group of women, because at that time women were not going to law school. And she was wonderful in helping us and advising us and encouraging us.
And not only in law, Lillian and her sister Clara formed the country's first savings bank run for and by women, later renamed the Women's Federal Savings and Loan Association, known today as Charter One Bank. The Honorable Lillian Westrop served as chairman of the board until her death in 1968 at age 84. For Hazel Mountain Walker, class of 1919, a law degree served a very different purpose. As she once said, she never intended to practice law. She just wanted to prove that a black woman could become a lawyer. She was one of the first African American women to graduate from the law school, and certainly one of the first admitted to practice in Ohio.
She was a very strong-willed woman, I thought very knowledgeable, and but at the time I didn't realize that she was a lawyer. I only found it out after I became a lawyer that she was a lawyer.
She was known as a teacher, and in 1936, the first African American female school principal in the history of Cleveland.
But the reason that she became the first Negro principal in Cleveland was because really from her background of the law and how forceful that she was as a speaker, and certainly during the campaign times, why then she was everywhere.
Hazel Mountain Walker maintained a prominent role in Cleveland politics and society until her death in 1980 at age 91. And there's the story of Genevieve Klein, class of 1921. After graduating from the Cleveland Law School, Genevieve entered private practice with her brother in Cleveland. But after just a year, President Warren Harding appointed her to a federal customs appraiser position in Cleveland, a first for an Ohio woman. And by 1928, she made national headlines, the first woman in the United States to take a seat on the federal bench. President Calvin Coolidge appointed her to the U.S. Customs Court. As the newspaper read, the only objection to her appointment was that of sex, one senator insisting that only men should receive such a position. Ironically, her salary was to be 20% more than his. But according to Judge Klein, she was no longer officially a woman, no longer Miss Klein of Cleveland, but a black-robed justice of a United States court, and she expected to act and be treated as such. She retired from public office in 1953, passing away 6 years later at age 82. Louise Prajan, class of 1922. Before donning her cap and gown, she had worked in bookkeeping and social work. She came to Cleveland from Springfield, Ohio in 1913, and she soon found her way to the Cleveland Law School, where she graduated at the age of 31.
She is the only one who practiced law. Louise Prajan practiced with Tom Fry.
A founding partner of the firm Fry and Prajan, Louise bears the legacy of Cleveland's first practicing African-American woman lawyer. Tragically, she died at the young age of 40 in 1932. Grace Doring McCord, class of 1925, is another proud tale. After working as a teacher and journalist, she enrolled in the Cleveland Law School, and she stole the headlines when she graduated with the school's highest grade point average ever, 99.25%. And even more amazing, she did it for the most part lying on her back in a plaster cast after having suffered a severe back injury. In 1927, Grace returned to law school, becoming the first graduate to receive a Master's of Law degree. By then, she was in private practice with her two brothers. In 1935, she became Ohio's first female law professor at the John Marshall School of Law, which had formed back in 1916 and was located here at the Hippodrome Theater building on Euclid Avenue.
Yes, I remember Grace very well. She always attended all the conventions, the American Bar Association convention. She traveled all over the world to their conventions. This time she was in London.
In London, Grace Doring was inducted as the president of the National Association of Women Lawyers, a position royal enough to earn a visit with the Queen. And more importantly, it was here at the age of 66 she finally married her longtime sweetheart, Jack McCord, an Alaskan miner who had been asking for her hand in marriage for the last 41 years. Grace McCord died in East Cleveland at the age of 93. Jane Edna Hunter, class of 1925, made her mark in women's history in Cleveland as a professional social worker.
I found her to be a very energetic woman, very demanding, and a go-getter. She got the job done. She really did. She taught me perseverance, if nothing else. You don't stop. You keep at it, and that's what she did.
While Miss Hunter never practiced law, she certainly helped improve the rights of women through the beloved organization she founded, the Phyllis Wheatley Association, which was named for an American slave poet.
The Phyllis Wheatley had started in 1911 as a home for girls away from home. The Phyllis Wheatley branched out into social services from just being a place for the girls.
The Phyllis Wheatley went on to serve the needs of more than 32,000 girls and women each year. The association remains in existence today. And while Jane Edna Hunter died in 1971 at age 89, her dedication to improving the lives of others lives on today at Cuyahoga County's Jane Hunter Social Service Agency, named on her behalf. Hers is just one more in the list of 100 inspiring stories of the law school's first 100.
I'm, of course, not familiar with the histories of all of these 100 women, but I strongly suspect that they all had multiple talents of persuasion in terms of being able to advance their careers, because they wouldn't have been successful otherwise.
For most of the first 100, going to school with all those men to study law was anything but ladylike.
Even my mother, who lived in Pennsylvania at the time, thought that why women should teach school, they should be social workers, and they didn't think too much of the idea first, but then afterwards it was all right.
But many women were forced to enroll in secrecy. Helen Slough, class of 1929, included.
She was a person whose parents didn't want her to go to law school, and so she went to engineering school, and she came here and went to school at night without her parents knowing it. And so she simultaneously got her engineering degree and her law degree. And at that point, her father, who was a well-known patent attorney here in town, allowed her to work in his office. But she told me that the biggest day professionally for her was when her father decided to pay her more than he was paying his secretary.
Helen Slough dedicated herself to practicing law for almost 70 years and died in 1999 at age 91.
At that time, when I was in law school, the men had their own fraternities, and the women weren't invited. So the women had got together and had their own sorority.
Kappa Beta Pi, a local chapter of an international legal sorority for women. Along with the law students themselves, many of the city's most prominent women judges and lawyers belonged as well.
And we needed that because we were rather new at the game, and we needed a lot of advice and help. And some of the older lawyers used to help us and advise us.
The ladies needed role models. It wouldn't be into the late 60s that a full-time woman law professor walked into their classroom. By that time, the Cleveland Law School and the John Marshall School of Law had merged into the Cleveland Marshall College of Law of today.
And I applied for a teaching job, and CSU hired me, and I was the first full-time core course teacher of law at CSU, and the third in the entire United States.
It was in 1968 when future federal judge Ann Aldrich began her 12-year run of teaching and learning.
It's very difficult, I think, as a woman professor. If you've never had any women professors, you don't have anyone to emulate. And the style of the professors who made you stand up to recite so they could cut you off at the knees and scare everybody to death wasn't something that a woman ought to follow, although I tried it.
We had quite a number of women faculty. At one point, we had more than any other law school in the country. Someone once asked, how did it happen that we had so many teachers? And someone said, I don't know that this is truthful, but someone said, we were cheap.
By 1971, Professor Jane Picker had joined the ranks. She was instrumental in forming the law school's nationally acclaimed Sex Discrimination and Employment Clinic.
We got involved in litigation challenging the practice then of the Board of Education here in Cleveland of forcing women to quit their jobs and take leaves of absence without pay when they were pregnant. Pregnancy cases got us nationwide attention because of the fact that the United States Supreme Court ruled in our case favorably. So that was, putting our clinic on the map.
Frankly, I think in the law school it was not quite as difficult as when I once became a lawyer. In the law school, everybody was scrambling, trying to, if you had something, if you knew something they wanted to know, they were very happy to get with you to get it. But once you got out and got into the practice and start working, that's when the problems came.
Well, they didn't practice downtown in those days because those are mostly law firms. They went out into the suburbs practiced with relatives usually. I don't know of anybody who practiced alone.
But they only took in their sons and their nephews, and certainly they're not their nieces, because that was not a profession or an elegant young lady who had
when I went down to court and so forth, they would stare because they think I was there just to hear what was going on during the case, and there I was presenting the case.
And they thought women were going to be terrible advocates. So when you won a case that any man worth his salt would have won easily, and you won it fairly easily, when you walked out of the courtroom, you were looked at like, oh, she got the whole ham instead of the piece of bacon that it really was about. If you'd been a guy, they would have recognized this win for a piece of bacon. So it had a downside in being expected, in that women were expected not to do well. But it had an upside that when you did do well, it got noticed.
Naoma Stewart, class of 1960, got noticed when she applied for a librarian position at a major Cleveland firm.
I interviewed her. I liked her a lot. She seemed to be very bright and had a good background in education. So I said, well, why don't you apply as a lawyer? And she said, well, women aren't invited to be lawyers in the law firms. And I said, well, that's maybe true today, but let's try it. So I went in to see Joe Little, who was our administrative partner, and introduced him to Naoma Stewart. Said she was a very able person who had just received a law degree, and I thought she ought to be considered as an associate in the firm. And that was a kind of a bold idea, but Joe Little said he'd take it up with our managing partner, Jack Revis, and so the word came back, well, all right, we'll try it.
By 1968, Naoma Stewart had made such a good impression, she was on her way to becoming the city's first woman partner.
So I was elected by my peers to go see Jack Revis, our managing partner, and try to talk him into admitting her to the partnership. And I went in and made my pitch, and he kind of whimsically said, well, look, I'm going to give you a choice. He said, we'll not make her a partner and I'll stay with the firm, or you can make her a partner and I'll leave. You get your choice. So that was a pretty easy choice at that time. But a year later, she was still doing great work, and so the ferment arose again, and I was asked again to go in to see Jack, and this time it was really an easy sell. I said, Jack, you really ought to do this on the merits. She deserves it. And he said, all right, all right.
Professor Jane Picker was another pioneer at the big firm when she arrived in Cleveland in 1969.
Well, I was the only woman in the firm. It was a firm of 125 lawyers at the time. I was told I was the first woman that had been hired, the first woman lawyer who had been hired. That turned out not to be true. There was a woman lawyer who was hired and worked in the library. There was another woman lawyer who was hired and who sat in her office with a typewriter and typed out, tax forms. But I was the first woman lawyer who had been hired who was acknowledged to be a lawyer, basically, and supposedly treated like a lawyer. But I wasn't allowed to travel because as an associate, if I had traveled, it would have been with a partner. And all partners were male by definition, so it wouldn't have looked well.
Needless to say, she left the big firm after just a year and a half. If any of the first 100 female graduates walked into the Cleveland Marshall College of Law today, they just wouldn't believe their eyes. In the class which enrolled in the fall of 1999, the women actually outnumber the men, 120 to 109. And according to predictions by the American Bar Association, 40% of the nation's lawyers will be female by the year 2010.
I think it's a wonderful profession, and I would advise a woman, if she's interested, to go for it.
Law is a really great trade. I know it's a profession, but trade for women, because you can balance having a family, doing things with them, and you can withdraw from 80-hour weeks kind of thing and get back into it again and not miss much.
Don't expect it to be easy. You've got to be willing to fight, and I don't expect that that's going to change. You can't expect things to be handed to you on a platter. It doesn't work that way. So you've got to be tough. You got to fight.
And never forget those that went before you. Their intelligence, fortitude, courage, and perseverance paved the way for the women of the 21st century. Always remember our first ladies.